Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This morning, we will be listening to three of our esteemed panel members who will talk about issues relating to the API community, specifically about the hate against South Asians. My name is Komi Vishakan. I am a Cal-APABA board member, as well as the president of SABA Northern California. So I am excited to invite three panelists today. Firstly, we have Manju Kulkarni. Manju is the executive director of AAPI Equity Alliance. This is the nation's largest reporting center tracking anti-API hate acts. Manju has been recognized on the prestigious Time 100 Most Influential People in the World and Bloomberg 50 lists. In 2021, Manju was the recipient of 2021 Webby Social Movement of the Year Award. Recently, she was honored with the 2024 James Irvine Leadership Award. Manju's work has been featured in the New York Times, NPR, CNN, as well as in numerous local and ethnic media outlets. As part of her advocacy, she works on API communities. Manju has shared her expertise with countless individuals and entities, including the Aspen Institute, the World Bank, the United Nations. In January 2024, Manju gave a TED Talk at the University of California, Berkeley. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Duke University and JD from Boston University School of Law. Thank you so much for being here, Manju.
Thanks so much, Komi, for that kind and generous introduction, and to Charles for coordinating and hosting this event along with the Cal-APABA board. It's just such a pleasure to be with you all today, and also a privilege alongside Kalpana and Krish. And so I have a few slides I wanted to share to really just set the stage for the topic we're discussing today, which is South Asian American hate. As Komi mentioned, I wear two hats. I'm with AAPI Equity Alliance here in Los Angeles, and also one of the co-founders of Stop AAPI Hate, which is a national organization. And so when we look at the hate our communities are experiencing, what's important first and foremost is to understand who we're talking about. Next slide. And so, this, of course, is Asia. And so when we think of Asian American, we, think of folks whose roots are from one of these countries. Next slide. And then for South Asia, it gets a little bit more complicated because there are different, essentially, definitions. You see there that, British India included different parts of South Asia. A lot of political scholars think of South Asian that includes Afghanistan, as well as Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, India. And then, some other folks, and sometimes those in the nonprofit space, think of primarily India, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Bhutan. So it really varies. Next slide. But when we think of the numbers based on the census, this is what it looks like. We have over 6 million individuals And you see there the countries of origin, also including Bangladesh, which I forgot to mention before, one of the largest countries from which communities come. And then we also have places like the Maldives and others. Next slide. And so what's important for us to also know and understand is when did folks arrive, right? For many individuals, especially those who've come to the US more recently, they may have thought of South Asian immigration as a recent phenomenon. But actually, those from our community have been here for over a century. And we know that after the Chinese Exclusion Act, many came in the 1880s. Then the largest population perhaps came in 1965. Then with the Immigration Act of 1990, we had folks from not only India, but large populations from Pakistan, Bangladesh. And then, of course, in 2000, H-1B visa holders, and also, over the course of the past few decades, a number of undocumented community members as well. Next slide. And so you see, in terms of that community formation, really has been dictated in a lot of ways by immigration, who was allowed to immigrate, how and when. That first wave came upon, as I said, the Chinese Exclusion Act. And also we had the context of the Gentleman's Agreement with Japan and the Asiatic Barred Zone Act, which I'll talk about in a moment. Next slide. And part of what is important to understand about anti-Asian hate, actually, before I say that, the last demographic piece I wanted to mention is that Indians specifically, or Indian Americans, are the largest Asian-only subgroup within Asian Americans. So in the last year, they have surpassed Chinese Americans, who overall are the largest population, but their numbers include those who are Chinese American and also who identify as biracial, whereas the Indian number is Indian only. Again, the largest number within the overall 24 million Asian Americans. But folks may know and understand, yellow peril, but really from early on in the 1900s, there was a concept of the dusky peril. And you see this from a newspaper in the Pacific Northwest, the concern about, quote, Hindu hordes invading the state. And so what that tells us is that much of the hate our communities have experienced and even experience now comes from rhetoric, xenophobic attitudes that are not just individual acts, but actually part of a whole ecosystem that includes policymaking, as well as rhetoric from elected officials, candidates, and even influential folks within media, within business, etc. Next slide. So early on, what you had in the early 1900s is after South Asians began to settle in the US in high numbers, there was an immediate backlash in the early 1900s. You have things like the Alien Land Law that made it illegal for immigrants to own land. You had a number of incidents in Washington where South Asians were driven out from the workforce, from lumber mills. You had, of course, denials on ability to then, of course, buy agricultural lands, et cetera. So just a number of things that made South Asians feel unwelcome and really are sort of governmental ways of expressing that hate. Next slide. And so the clearest example of this was the Asiatic Barred Zone Act, which prevented individuals from coming to the United States from Asia, essentially labeling them as undesirables. And this had a tremendous impact on those from South Asia, making it impossible for them to come to the United States from 1917 largely until 1965. Next slide. And you see there all of the countries that are part of the Asiatic Barred Zone Act. Next slide. And Bhagat Singh Thind was denied U.S. citizenship because he was not a white male. So, these things, one on top of the other, a Supreme Court case essentially denaturalizing him and thousands of others simply because of their race. And you see now we're looking exactly 100 years ago, and now we're facing some of these same attacks against our community members. Next slide, Charles. And this is the last historical one, which is the Immigration Act of 1924, really stopping all immigration to non-white individuals. And I wanted to end the historical part mentioning that because we are seeing that again, very likely to have a Muslim ban 2.0 coming down the pike in the next few days. This will, of course, significantly impact, as we understand it, individuals from Pakistan and other South Asian countries. And when we think about then South Asian hate now, what we're talking about, and Charles, can you just put up one or two slides? I just want to mention our South Asian hate report that we did, Empowered and Imperiled. And what we saw there is the hate that has been growing online against South Asian communities. We did this report at Stop AAPI Hate, and it shows a huge increase in attacks online against South Asians. We did a more recent report in following the election that found there was a 66% increase in hate against South Asians online. And this shows that the numbers are even much more significant than the hate that we've seen at the Stop AAPI Hate reporting center, which was roughly 20% or so of South Asians were among the communities reporting to us. In a study with NORC, we found that 45% had experienced hate, but now we see these rising numbers against our communities. So I'll stop there and, just point out again how serious this problem is and that it comes from all of the different places, not just individual attacks, but also governmental policies and rhetoric from those in places of influence. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Manju, for that historic perspective. We don't tend to hear information about how, early on in the 1920s, this started. So it is not a recent topic. It's great to hear that. I would love to hear from Kalpana and Krish as well. So let me just give a quick introduction. Next on my list, I have Krish Omara Vignaraja. She is the president and CEO of Global Refuge. She previously served in the Obama White House as policy director for First Lady Michelle Obama and at the State Department as senior advisor under Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Secretary of State John Kerry. At the White House, Krish served as policy director for Michelle Obama and led the First Lady's signature Let Girls Learn initiative. It's one of my favorite ones. Krish holds a master's degree in political science and a Bachelor of Science from Yale. She was a Marshall Scholar at Oxford University, where she earned a master's in international relations. Welcome, Krish. I also know that you have a personal story coming from Sri Lanka, your parents coming from Sri Lanka. Hopefully, you can maybe share some perspective about that. Before I let you speak, let me quickly introduce Kalpana as well. Kalpana Pedibotla is a Saba Life member. She is an executive director of the newly formed South Asian American Justice Collaborative, SAJCO. This is an organization that seeks to advance the rights of South Asians living in the United States. She's an experienced immigration attorney. She has over 25 years of immigration law experience. She has a great perspective on the impact of the immigration policies that it has on South Asians. Kalpana's work extends beyond the courtroom. She, in terms of pro bono efforts with the organizations like ACLU, the Tahir Justice Center, and the Catholic Charities. She's featured regularly in NPR, the New York Times, Forbes, MSNBC, and ABC. So happy to have the three of you here. So Krish and Kalpana, please add your perspective to Manju's great information about the history of South Asian hate.
Sure. And Komi, I just want to make sure, do you want me to also touch on H-1Bs at this point, or would you want to wait for that part?
Yeah, we can wait for that part if you don't mind, Krish. Yeah, so if you wanted to share any personal stories about South Asian hate, any personal stories you have, that'd be great. If not, we can move on to Kalpana. And Kalpana, do you want to share any stories?
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm just going to apologize in advance. I am at my home office and our dogs are barking. So I think the question, Komi, you were asking for our own personal experiences with beyond sort of our roles today. Is that the question?
Yeah.
So I think, Komi, you've heard me speak when we first started promoting Sajco. My family was early to the United States in the sense of coming here in the 1950s, not as early as some of the migrations that Manju touched upon. And I'd say from the moment we've been here, every single member of my family has experienced some version of discrimination or even hate violence. And all the way, and what I'd like to talk, when I talk about in my remarks, it goes all the way down from the early stages of just going to school and, the ways in which we show up in the world. So I purposely dressed in Desi clothes today, South Asian clothes, to make the point that it wasn't safe to do that. It doesn't feel safe again to do that. And I recall many times being asked to normalize my appearance to fit in. But the reality is, at the end of the day, my complexion, my features prevent that sometimes from being possible in the places I've grown up in the US. I was born in California, grew up in upstate New York, and then lived in Texas, where religion was very much imposed upon within the school system. And so the identities that don't either fit that normative Christian religion, we were treated quite badly as regarded as heathens. And that was a lot of the experience I had growing up. And it didn't really change necessarily fully when coming to California, which sometimes might puzzle people, but that's the reality. Is when you, despite how long we've been in the United States, it seems we're always treated as if we've just arrived. Okay? And so that has been, I think, if we're going to embrace the cultures of this country, which are numerous and they're beautiful, we cannot have everybody pretend to be on a single team, which is language I see used now in our education system. And I think that's really important to kind of identify, is we need to be able to show up as we are and feel protected to be able to do so. So I don't want to go through all the experiences, because there have been some terrible ones, but then at the same time, there's been embracing ones. And I'm glad to be part of this organization that hopefully seeks to help people who are newly arriving, especially, to be able to understand the history that we've come from and be able to know how to stand up for the rights.
Thank you for sharing that powerful message, Kalpana. Krish, now I will ask you, during the H-1B debate, we saw a lot of anti-South Asian hate rhetoric. That was very disturbing. We've never maybe in the recent past, we didn't hear that, or this was very jarring to most of us. Since you are in the midst of this and as part of your organization, can you tell us from your perspective, is this something new that we're dealing with, or have you always had to deal with it? Take it away.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. And really appreciate the invitation to participate. I will also just add, given that I'm a lawyer as well, it's especially important, I think, to have these conversations amongst legal advocates. But because I do find that in the last 2 months, I have dusted off my law books, used my bar certification more than ever before, because obviously the legal safeguards have been one of the most important constraints in terms of some of the lawlessness and very reactionary policies that we've seen. I also find, related to the question, Kumi, you asked, and the comments that Manju and Kalpana shared, that when you are the head of an immigration organization, an immigrant by background, because I was born in Sri Lanka, I came to the US when I was 9 months old. There is, I think, an added amount of racism, because you're viewed as trying to advance an agenda that relates to your identity. The reality is because I came here when I was 9 months old. America's really the only country that I've ever known. But it is really sad when, you continue to see that hate alive and well today, perhaps even enabled by the political environment. So kind of with those brief remarks, I'll, kind of talk a little bit about what we've seen with H-1Bs, because the truth is that much of the racist rhetoric, I think, is born in part from the misinformation and fear-mongering that we've seen in the election season, that unfortunately, when it's come to governance, has not changed one iota. So earlier this year, we saw a split in the new administration's rhetoric on skilled immigrants, with some making the argument that H-1B visas hurt American workers, and others who may have been the beneficiary of H-1B visas, or trying to champion a business agenda, taking a very strong and strident argument, position in favor of H-1Bs. When we look at this argument that H-1Bs are hurting American workers, and this frame that it is zero sum, I think we realize that the argument is frankly full of holes. And given that 72% of H-1B visa holders are Indian, it does deeply worry me in terms of the racism that it has engendered. We no longer operate in an environment where there is an implicit bias. We are seeing explicit hatred, white nationalism, when it comes to the debate on H-1Bs. At Global Refuge, we support all legal pathways for immigration, and many, I think, experts have highlighted how the H-1B program is one of the most tightly regulated immigration processes in the US. And so when we're having this debate about people need to come the right way, I think H-1Bs are an exemplar of what that looks like. The H-1B visa program, it's good for 3 years. It can be extended to a period of 6 years total. There's an annual cap on how many of these visas can be granted in the US, and even to qualify, an employer has to prove that it will not affect the wages or the working conditions of similarly employed US workers. And so the system is built with these safeguards. Studies have shown that the economic contributions of H-1B workers may actually increase the employment opportunities available to native-born workers in the US, and that unemployment rates are actually relatively low in the occupations that employ large numbers of H-1B workers. And so I think that's where it's just really important to understand that, in so many industries, including, IT and tech, what we see is not, immigrants who are stealing Americans' jobs, but they're filling jobs that would otherwise go unfilled, and they're creating jobs. So a recent study found that an increase in the share of workers within a particular occupation who were H-1B visa holders was associated with a decrease in the unemployment rate within that occupation. So, my point here is that it doesn't kind of take a part of the pie, it actually grows the pie. And adding 100 H-1B visa holders was found to create 183 jobs for native-born workers. And so I think it's really important for us to stop getting out of this scarcity mentality and understand that H-1Bs actually help create an abundancy environment. Another recent study found that restrictions on H-1B visas, such as rising denial rates, motivate US-based multinational corporations to decrease the total number of jobs that they offer in the US and to instead increase the employment at foreign affiliates. And so in the last couple months, we've heard a lot about onshoring and, bringing business back to America. I think it's really important to understand how H-1Bs enable that agenda. And, contrary to a popular belief that H-1B visa holders are paid less and decrease the average wage for native-born workers as well, in recent years, the median wage of H-1B workers actually grew by 52%, while the median wage for all U.S. workers increased by just 39%. So clearly, H-1Bs are benefiting this particular part of the economy. Many economists believe that the H-1B visa program actually creates new job opportunities for native-born Americans. The American Immigration Council has laid out a few ways that it's done that. So I'll maybe just quickly rattle that off as I end. So first, immigrant workers and native-born workers often have different skill sets and fill different types of roles. So I just want to be clear in terms of this is not a competitive dynamic. So as a result, they complement each other in the labor market rather than competing for the exact same jobs. Second, foreign workers spend and invest their wages in the U.S. economy, which increases consumer demand and creates new jobs. Immigrants paid over $650 billion in taxes in 2023 and had a spending power of $1.7 trillion. So while that is representative of all immigrants and not just H-1B visa holders, I think it's a powerful indicator of the impact of immigrants who are entering the economy. Third, businesses often respond to the presence of skilled immigrant workers and consumers by expanding operations in the U.S. rather than looking to more, to move overseas. I think fourth, it's important to just highlight how immigrants themselves often end up starting new businesses that fuel the economy. So nearly 25% of immigrants count themselves as entrepreneurs, generating $116 billion in business income. And then, of course, when you look at, I know there's been a lot of discussion about the stocks. When you look at the Fortune 500 companies that are such a key part of our economic engine, 230 of those 500 companies are founded by immigrants or children of immigrants. And so I, just will end by saying this is where when we talk about America as a superpower, I gave a TED talk about the role of immigrants in that. New ideas, new innovations, remaining America, a superpower globally. That is where immigrants are just a critical and invaluable component of our economy.
Thank you so much, Krish, for laying out those statistics about H-1B. We know that it benefits the country, but we didn't know how much. But it's very disturbing to then find why there's so much rhetoric against it. The only reason we can think of is that because most South Asians hold H-1B visas. So it's talk and it's clear, but thank you. Kalpana, I believe you wanted to contribute to this conversation.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks so much, Krish, for laying out the economics and the economic benefits that we gain from the H-1B system and immigrants overall. And remarkably, it was actually President George Bush that acknowledged that immigrants are a bridge to our future. So it's not I don't think, a partisan consideration. I think there is something to be concerned about when the majority of H-1Bs are specifically from India. There are two things I'd like to say in addition to the job multiplier points that Krish had made. One is that H-1Bs are required to be paid a prevailing wage. It's a prevailing wage that is actually set by the Department of Labor, that is built into the visa process. That is one of the few visas where that is actually the case. And two, there are immigrants coming from other parts of the world, like on E2s, E3s. E2s benefit many European countries. E3s are specifically for Australians. L1s, which are like an intercompany transfer, yet those visas do not receive the same scrutiny. And I think that it's important. What Krish has done is to lay out the facts of who actually has the H-1B visa, to wonder why that visa gets singled out more than any other group on claims of wage cutting when it's built into its entire system to call it to have a prevailing wage.
No, thank you so much. Manju, did you want to add?
Well, one thing, that's important to remember is that a lot of the hate that we are seeing, and just even starting in December and January, I had mentioned that anti-South Asian hate has gone up even since the election, and much of it in these online spaces was due to really adverse and negative feelings about the H-1B process. It came up in the news quite a bit, through Vivek Ramaswamy and essentially public conversations between him and Elon Musk about the H-1B visa program. But in a lot of these conservative spaces, there's a strong backlash to it. And that's what we saw present in the data around South Asians specifically, that the newer type of hate was related back to H-1B visa holders. And what I wanted to mention as well is, the attack has shown up in policy as well, which is that there was an executive order drafted by President Trump to take away birthright citizenship of children born to H-1B visa holders. It was supposed to go into effect, I believe, on February 18th. A number of attorneys general came in. They were able to get a stay on that so that it didn't go into effect. But what we heard was, and a number of South Asian media outlets reported, that South Asian women who were themselves on H-1B visas or were spouses of H-1B visa holders were actually requesting to have elective C-sections prior to the 18th so that their children would not be born stateless. So think of how horrific that is, that rather than choose medical care that is in the best medical interest of your child, you're having to do that because of political threats to your family, in the form of revoking of birthright citizenship, which so many in our community have benefited from. So, just to make the point that these attitudes then do become actualized in policies and then have real world and real life impacts on our communities.
Thank you for sharing that, Manju. So, I mean, this is a difficult time for all of us. But there is, when you look around with organizations such as all of yours, all three of you, for instance, your organizations are doing something, and it's really important to highlight that. And if you would indulge me, I would start off with Kalpana, the newly formed SAJCO, is promising to do amazing things. Maybe you can start us off on that, and then we would love to hear from both Krish and Manju as well as to how you are on the ground addressing these issues.
Thanks so much, Komi, and no pressure there, right? So the South Asian American Justice Organization, we formed last year with a mission to fight for the civil and human rights of South Asians in the U.S. We intend to meet these goals through direct legal services, impact litigation, and community engagement. And as the fastest growing immigrant group in the U.S., we actually saw a critical need for an organization equipped to address culturally specific challenges and linguistic needs. And while our community stories aren't necessarily unique, SAJCO aims to be an additional resource, a place where people can find legal support, advocacy, and solidarity. And as harking back to Manju's comments, we also recognize the long history of systemic barriers faced by many communities. And I think SAJCO hopes that we can to learn from these movements and stand alongside them in a broader fight for justice. Some of the things that we're doing right now and the issues that we're facing and are concerned about, just picking up on the thread about birthright citizenship. That birthright citizenship issue, it is about who belongs, right? So and I think whether somebody's here on an undocumented or on a temporary visa, it concerns us, this notion that we should take away something that is enshrined in our Constitution away from our unborn children. And to that extent, to the extent South Asians in particular are harmed, and I would say in the immigration context with regard to folks coming from India on an H-1B, their long backlog in the green card system, which that's a whole bigger thing to unravel, but people could be waiting 10 to 20 years to get a green card in the United States and then eventually become a citizen. And in that time, they're likely to have children. And yet, on one hand, we want those workers in the US, where 500,000 software engineers hail from India, having the largest number of software engineers in the world. We want some of those people here, but we provide them no avenue to live a normal life, have children that know that they will be protected and have a country that they belong to. So who belongs, that's a concern to us. And we are, to that extent, we have signed on to the amicus brief that the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund has submitted in support of the birthright citizenship case. We're worried right now about student visa revocations. In the last week, hundreds of students have had their visas revoked for in some cases for no reason at all, is what we've seen as of today. We have concerns around the upcoming travel bans and the entire national security narrative of racial profiling, religious profiling. And as some of you may know, the travel ban potentially will impose restrictions for people coming from Afghanistan and from Pakistan. And so in that sense, SAJCO wants to be part of and is making steps to being part of supporting people who are facing those circumstances by providing direct legal services, joining other organizations in impact litigation. And I think the one thing I'd like to speak to is a program that we're launching, comes up this Thursday. If I don't mind me giving a plug, we started a program called Community Engagement Series. This is a year-long programming of webinars and podcasts addressing Know Your Rights, unpacking hate, civic participation and democracy, with a particular focus on the South Asian experience. This Thursday, we will be joined by Amol Sinha, the executive director of the ACLU in New Jersey, who will be speaking to us about the Mahmoud Khalil case, whose office he has led the charge in protecting Mr. Khalil's rights. here, and I will hopefully be able to address the recent F1 visa revocations. And just a shout out that I'm so grateful Manju Kulkarni will be joining us for our historical look back in one of our series coming up. I believe it's in May. So that series, our intentions there is as sort of the tip of the iceberg. It's just to help our own communities know their history, know their rights, and mobilize for change.
Thank you so much about that information about SAJCO. We are all very supportive and excited to see how we can collaborate with SAJCO and provide the response that's required at this time. Provide the response and the support. So, Krish, we would love to hear more about Global Refuge and what you are doing over there in the East Coast.
Yeah, sounds great. So just a quick background around Global Refuge. So we are the largest faith-based immigration nonprofit in the U.S. We now operate in Guatemala and Mexico as well. The work began in 1939 as we were helping Lutheran pastors, professors, others flee Nazi Germany, but that mandate really quickly expanded. So we've responded to every immigration crisis since then. Our work is essentially divided between serving refugee resettlement, which has been hard as of late because the president signed an executive order suspending refugee resettlement, shared with all of the resettlement agencies a stop work order, and then terminated all 10 resettlement agencies that partner with the State Department. Some of you may have seen just yesterday, the Catholics indicated that they were no longer going to do the work of welcome as a result of the federal government's pulling out of their support. We have a strong line of work working with unaccompanied kids. So these are children who are reunifying with a parent or guardian. It's why in 2018, during the family separation crisis, we were one of the 2 organizations the government turned to reunify kids with their parents. We then partner also with companies in terms of economic empowerment, sort of related to some of the points that Kalpana and I were both making in terms of how invaluable immigrants are to our strength as a nation. So in terms of kind of how lawyers can get involved, I would divide it into really 3 areas. First, in terms of legal services, I think all of us have touched on how important a safeguard this is going to be in the near future. I was quite serious when I said I've never spent more time essentially serving as general counsel, because it really does seem that any strong defense has involved litigation. So we're involved with a lawsuit that just made its way actually to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, where we challenged refugee resettlement actions taken by the administration. We also launched legal services in the last couple of years because we knew how critical it was and really life-changing for our clients in terms of having some guidance in how to navigate the legal labyrinth that's frankly even difficult for lawyers like me to navigate, let alone folks who are coming to this country who English is not their first language. And so we are always looking to partner with lawyers, law firms, legal clinics in terms of undertaking this work, just because we have more clients than we have lawyers. And then I think the third piece I would say is, we operate all across the country, including in California. So we've actually been having some discussions about how to launch our next Welcome Center in California. We've got to figure out a way that this work doesn't hinge as critically as it does on the federal government. We know that immigration is such a divisive issue. It shouldn't be, but it is, because I think it is fairly easy for politicians to say, look, here is a national crisis, let's blame it on immigrants. And we've seen that whether it's affordable housing or the opioid epidemic. And so I think that is where we need ambassadors. We need people who not just care about H-1B visas, but care about refugee resettlement, who care about asylum, who still believe in this work. And so, if you want to learn more, our website is globalrefuge.org. I certainly learned this when I ran for office. It was somewhat tragic where sometimes people would say, oh, we want to support her, but she's Sri Lankan American as opposed to Indian American, or Sri Lankans who might say, yes, we want to support her, but she's Tamil by background as opposed to Sinhalese. And I'm like, look, if you take a step back in terms of the challenges and the scale of what we are talking about, we are all part of the same tribe. And I would say that more generally in terms of when it comes to the challenges we're facing in the immigration space and more broadly, we are all part of the same tribe. And so even if this is not the most personal issue to you, I do believe that having that solidarity is going to be critical to our success. So appreciate the opportunity.
What a powerful message, Krish. This is not the time to think about the division within us. It's the time to stand together to achieve some major goals here. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. Manju, I will go to you next. I mean, just the report that you release each year with the statistics and the information as part of the API, your organization, Equity Alliance, is so valuable to us because that information gathering is so important. So can you tell us more about that, about how you go about that, and maybe how you, more importantly, how you use that information in terms of helping us with policy development and things like that?
Sure. Happy to do so. And let me just say, I want to thank, Kalpana and Krish for their work. And I mean, I think what's so critical in this moment is having, direct assistance, having those who are in policy-making circles, connecting the dots between the two of those. And for us, that third dot is really understanding the scope of the problem. And so, as you mentioned, we've done our report on, imperiled, empowered, which was looking at online hate. Additionally, we've been providing reports of what we have gotten from Stop API Hate, which is direct reporting from individuals who've experienced hate, just living their daily lives. And then finally, the State of Hate report, which is done with NORC out of University of Chicago. And that is broad-based national survey data. And in all of these three ways, we've been able to show what the impacts are on our communities. And those impacts are unfortunately significant. What is important, though, to note when we are armed with, the data as well as individual assistance, is we can take that information and go to policymakers. And so I think right now what's so important as lawyers, whether you're doing this work or not, being able to use, the institutions that you belong to, the clubs, the affinity groups, and the political organizations to really do community engagement work so that all of our communities know and understand the threats, and then also do some of that policy work. And by policy work, it can even mean calls to our representatives, right? You don't have to be part of a nonprofit organization to do this. Every day for the past few weeks, I've been making a call to my senators, also to my local congressperson, because there's so many things happening through the executive orders right now that hurt and harm our communities. I think the other thing that's important is representation matters. We know it matters all the time, but even, now it's more important than ever. And Krish, I so appreciate your running for office. That is that, critical next step of having those both at state as well as federal levels who can speak out for our communities. And to have that leadership, I mean, that's what we're talking about right now. And those who are in the audience, all of you are also leaders. So, there are those three things you can do, which is to get involved now on an individual level, whether it's pro bono help. Secondly, being able to call your local state and federal officials. and that final piece, which is running for office, because all of those are needed in this moment, and those will enable us and our communities to get the justice we deserve. And this is not, if I can be clear, not the time to sit on the sidelines. We saw, as I mentioned, 100 years ago, where all, very, very similar things happened to our communities, and we're seeing it now a century later. So unfortunately, history is repeating itself, but it can repeat itself in a good way, which is people being resilient, being activated, and being part of that resistance.
No, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. There are so many, we're able to gather so much information from all of you in terms of what we could be doing. Most of us on the ground feel helpless. It feels like we don't have the expertise to do anything. But like you said, run for the office. Call your local member. There's so much we can do, and even if it is to connect somebody who's seeking help to the right attorney or to any of your organizations, if we can just do one little simple thing like that, that is something. But thank you for sharing all of that information. We have 10 more minutes left. In that time, we wanted to hear from you. Any sort of closing parting comments that you wanted to make in terms of what the audience should sort of take away from this session. We've learned so much about the history of it and so much details about what is actually happening, so that we are not thinking this issue is going to sort of go away, or this will pass, and it's not looking like that. It's actually getting worse by the day. So what suggestions or recommendations that you can give to all of us? And Krish already addressed this issue. Even within our community, we have, it's a diverse community, and we have divisions and difference of opinion, and that's likely because of the large area we are covering. But as standing together, what can each of us do? What are your recommendations? Who would like to go first?
Sorry, I thought Krish was going to unmute. I can speak to a little bit about my perspective. So first off, I think remaining silent shouldn't be an option for people anymore. But if you are fearful of speaking up, because I think there's a lot of this concern, right? If you say something, you might experience retribution in some form. And I know this is happening within the legal community, within nonprofits. I would say find ways to exercise your voice, maybe find organizations like the ones that you see here today that have joined, or others. It's important to find ways, I think, of engaging. That's one thing I would say is needed in this moment, and we should treat this as a crisis moment. We're talking today about combating hate for against South Asians, but we're not the only community that experiences hate, and so reaching across and finding others and being in community with them, being in solidarity with them, I think is super important. So those are some remarks that from my perspective. If you're interested in the work that we're doing, we're looking for volunteer lawyers. Our goal is to launch a hotline in just a few short weeks, providing resources, pairing people with lawyers. So if you're if you want to do that type of work, we're looking for people. Right now, I would call this a form of persecution that's happening to our international students, and they're desperately looking for legal help. And if that's something you're interested in, reach out to us, reach out to others that may be supporting them. There's so many ways to engage. As a bars association, that's the way we can exercise power. And if you feel like you can't do it at the law firms where you are today, because that's real, find organizations which might find a way for you to plug in that may not be directly representing or taking on cases, but there's so much need out there right now.
Thank you, Kalpana.
So I can jump in. I just didn't want to step on toes, but I also don't want to be the last word because I don't know that I'm going to have an epiphany. Look, I'll say it has been incredibly hard. My husband runs the National Wildlife Federation. And so whether it's immigration or the environmental space, like in many ways, we feel like we're at the eye of the storm. And so I think it is absolutely justified to say, look, this has been an overwhelming moment and you can feel pretty dejected. But the reality is that we don't have an alternative, right? I think for so many of us, this country has given us so much that this is that rude awakening for how we stand up and fight back. And I think that is where these conversations are invaluable because I do think, as I said before, the legal safeguards and the legal system is really the only check that is working right now, because otherwise, Congress has been ineffective. Public opinion, because there's been such a flooding of the zone, it's too difficult to get the public to express outrage on one thing because there are so many outrageous things that are happening in this moment. And so you have a power to do things that, frankly, no other constituency is able to do. And so, as Kalpana said, whether it is partnering with one of our organizations, whether it is finding another one in your community, this is the moment. I'm going to borrow the kind of phrase used in the context of terrorism, because what we are seeing is an aim to kind of make people feel terror. If you see something, say something, right? I don't care what form your opposition to some of these policies takes, but we can't sit on the sidelines, as Manju said. And I think that this is where we are starting to see a tipping point where people are outraged, and they're outraged when they see a number of different things. But what we've got to do is figure out a way to stitch that coalition together for us to be successful.
Thank you so much, Krish. Manju?
Thank you. Ditto to everything that Kalpana and Krish said. And I think really, what we're seeing now, is attacks on our democracy, right? And our democratic way of life. When we hear that the president, the administration, and even members of Congress are against DEI, we should be very clear about what that is, right? It's not simply our ability to celebrate holidays or have affinity groups. We have to look at what the opposite of DEI is, right? So the opposite of diversity is segregation. Right. The opposite of equity is withholding of services and resources. And of course, the opposite of inclusion is exclusion. And that's what we're talking about, is really taking our country back 100 years to a time when racism was normalized, homophobia was normalized, attacks against so many of our community members was, the status quo. And there have been so many positive things that have happened in the last 100 years: the Civil Rights Movement, the Immigration Act of 1965, having communities and individuals be themselves in every possible way. And so, Kalpana said it well, which is solidarity, right? When we talk about identities, they are not simply for us to break bread together, but really to come together as a political force. And that is what South Asian American means. That is what AAPI means. And I think that gives us an opportunity to come together with other communities of color and marginalized communities, because democracy is not a spectator sport. So we need to all put on our cleats and our shin guards and get out on the pitch and play our hearts out and fight for what we believe in, fight for our communities, and fight for our country.
Thank you. With that, thank you so much, Manju. With that, I just want to thank, we have less than a minute left on the clock. So thank you so much to the three of you for the courageous work you're doing and for taking the time from your busy schedules, like this is the moment where you are all working super hard. But for that 1 hour that you set aside for us, and we've learned so much from you, thank you to all of you. And I also would like to thank Charles Jung and Anthony Liu, who run these Asian Hate series on behalf of Cal-APABA. So I would like to thank them for the hard work that they do. Keep an eye out for the next session in the series. But this session on the South Asian hate has just been amazing. And the amount of information we've got from you today, it has been amazing. So thank you to all 4 of you.